In 1959, deep in the jungles of northern Vietnam, a top-secret order was issued from the highest levels of the communist leadership. The mission: build a supply route connecting North Vietnam to the south, cutting through one of the most treacherous mountain ranges in Southeast Asia, the Truong Son, or the Annamite Mountains. This wasn't just a road. It was a lifeline, a passage for weapons, food, medicine, and people vital to the survival of the Southern resistance. General Nguyen Van Vin was assigned to lead the operation. Under his command, a unit called Group 559 was quietly formed. The soldiers chosen were young, many barely out of their teens. Armed not with tanks or trucks, but with machetes, shovels, and sheer determination, they set out into the unknown. No GPS, no maps, not even a clear destination. Only the promise of a path through darkness. By night, they carved trails through thick jungle. By day, they moved in silence, avoiding enemy planes and patrolling forces. Each footstep marked the beginning of what would become one of the most remarkable logistical feats in modern military history. The first axes struck trees under the cover of cicada cries and monsoon winds. These footsteps, silent, unseen, would soon echo through the heart of a nation at war. They didn't just build a road. They paved the way for victory. The Ho Chi Minh Trail was born. The first footsteps of Group 559 into the Truong Son jungle marked a journey never before taken. There were no maps, no existing paths, only red dirt, trembling compasses, and sheer determination. The jungle ahead was so thick it swallowed sunlight. Roots twisted beneath the earth like traps, and vines coiled tightly around legs like knives. By day, they cleared the way with dull machetes and tiny shovels. By night, they hung hammocks on cliffsides, ears alert to every crack in the underbrush, wondering if it was wild beasts, or worse, the enemy. Jungle malaria swept through the ranks. Soldiers' skin turned pale, their lips cracked, eyes sunken from lack of sleep. In each backpack, a few pounds of dry food, a thin raincoat, and old newspaper, used as toilet paper, as insulation, even to scribble down diary entries. They joked that they were men chasing sunlight in a forest of shadows, because the only light they saw was what pierced the canopy, or glinted in a comrade's eye once. An entire platoon lost its way for 3 days in the misty belly of the forest. They camped beneath a centuries-old tree, surviving on sips of rainwater and instinct. They carved arrows into the bark with knives to mark the way home. One soldier, delirious with fever, still gripped the rope, pulling his rifle. Every step forward, every patch of jungle cleared, was not just survival. It was a quiet, defiant victory. The mountains of Truong Son were not just tall, they were unforgiving.
Sharp limestone peaks tore at boots.
Slopes so steep that a single misstep meant death. As Group 559 pressed deeper into the range, they discovered that the jungle was only the beginning. Now came the cliffs, the ridges, and the narrow paths where a mule could barely pass. Here, every meter forward cost hours, sometimes lives. 1 early morning, a unit was scaling a rocky slope near a place the maps didn't name. Halfway up, the lead man triggered a booby trap left by French forces decades earlier. The explosion echoed down the valley. 2 men died instantly. The rest hit the ground, blood mixing with dust. But they didn't retreat. Under cover of gunfire and falling debris, they pulled the wounded back, patched up with what little cloth and morphine they had. They buried the dead beneath a tree overlooking the valley, marking the spot with a rusted bayonet driven into the soil. That night, they renamed the pass Dao Mao, Blood Pass. Sickness hit just as hard as the enemy. Some soldiers developed trench foot from days spent in wet boots. Others coughed blood from sleeping on damp stone. Yet every morning, they rose and climbed again, their hands blistered and eyes hollow. The jungle may have tried to drown them, but the mountains tried to crush them. And still they carved forward. Not because they were unafraid, but because turning back meant giving up the road to the south. And that was never an option. They were barely 20, some not even 18. Thin, sun-darkened girls from rice paddies and fishing villages, wearing khaki shirts that hung loose over bony shoulders. But each of them carried 60 kilograms of ammunition, rice, or medicine, sometimes all three. The road called them volunteer youth, but they were more than that. They were the silent strength behind the supply line, with bamboo baskets strapped to their backs and rubber sandals on blistered feet. They crossed rivers in the dark, scaled hills in the rain, and dodged bomb craters like stepping stones. They learned to walk without sound, to sleep standing up, and to smile even when they were starving. Each night, they buried their fears with the sun and rose again before dawn. One girl, Tuet, once walked for 16 hours straight, carrying 40 kilograms of shells. Her shoulder bled where the strap bit into flesh. When she arrived at the depot, the soldiers clapped, but she fainted before she could smile. Another, Tan, stood guard while her squad slept. An American plane flew low above the trees. She didn't flinch. When the others awoke, they found her still standing, rifle ready, her hair damp from mist, her eyes never blinking. These girls weren't trained to fight, but they became soldiers in every sense. Some never returned. Some were buried in unmarked graves along the trail they helped build. But their footsteps were etched in the mud, in the memory of those who survived. They carried not just supplies, but the heartbeat of a nation moving through fire. They called them steel horses. But these were not racing bikes or war machines. They were ordinary bicycles, modified, welded, reinforced until they could carry over 300 kilograms of ammunition, rice, or even mortar parts. In the jungle, they became the quiet engines of the war. At first, they were tools of desperation. Trucks couldn't pass through narrow paths, and porters couldn't carry enough. But with bamboo frames and iron rods, the bicycles became beasts of burden. They had no pedals, only men pushing, pulling, guiding them across rocky trails, steep slopes, and flooded valleys. Nguyen Van Long, a wiry man from Tan Hoa, became a legend on the trail. He once pushed a loaded bicycle 700 kilometers in 23 days. He slept beside it, talked to it like a comrade, and cursed it when it slipped in the mud. He said, "This bike is heavier than a buffalo, but it doesn't complain." Each trip was a battle. The tires shredded on sharp rocks. Chains snapped.
Axles bent.
But the men improvised. They patched tubes with tree resin, tied axles with vines, and carried extra spokes in their belts. Sometimes they traveled in silence. Other times, they sang under their breath. Not to be heard, but to forget the ache in their backs and legs. When they passed each other, they nodded, not speaking. Words would only remind them how far they still had to go. These bicycles didn't fire bullets or command armies, but they carried the weight of a nation's resistance. In the mud and mist of the Truong sun, victory didn't ride in on tanks. It rolled in on two worn wheels. The jungle was brutal. The mountains were unforgiving. But the deadliest enemy came from above. Starting in the mid-1960s, American bombers began their relentless assault on the Truong Sun Trail. Day and night, the roar of jet engines thundered over the canopy. Explosions shattered the earth. Leaves didn't grow back. Craters became lakes. Entire hills disappeared. The soldiers learned to move like shadows. They built the trail in silence, hid supply depots under false floors, and camouflaged trucks with bamboo leaves. During the day, everything stood still. At night, they moved again, patching craters, dragging broken carts, replanting trees, rebuilding what had been destroyed just hours before. But the bombs weren't the worst. The orange clouds were. Agent Orange, the chemical that didn't explode but killed slowly. It withered plants, poisoned rivers, and stained the skin. Years later, the soldiers would learn what it did to unborn children. But in those days, they only knew that trees died where they had once bloomed. Once, a convoy was caught in an ambush. A single B-52 dropped a payload that split the jungle in half.
Bodies disappeared, no trace, no burial.
The survivors dug with bare hands, trying to find helmets, boots, anything. They only found silence. They began calling the sky the god of no mercy. But even the sky couldn't stop them. Every crater filled became a story. Every burnt tree was replaced with footsteps forward. The jungle bled, but it lived. The trail lived. And the soldiers, though broken and blistered, kept walking. Because surrender was never in their vocabulary. During the peak of Operation Rolling Thunder, bombs fell so often that soldiers didn't look up anymore. The thunder of explosions became background noise. Fire swept across jungle floors, igniting tents, supplies, even the trees themselves. But the soldiers stayed. They learned to crawl with flames licking at their heels. They learned to sleep beside unexploded bombs. The sound of branches cracking no longer meant wildlife. It meant death from above. That I in the middle of one air raid, a squad of female volunteers was caught in open ground. They didn't scream. They threw themselves over the ammunition crates, shielding them with their bodies. One girl's hair caught fire. She didn't move until the bombing stopped. When they finally stood, the crates were intact, and her hair was gone. In another moment, a soldier stepped into a bomb crater only to find it filled with water. As he pulled his leg from the mud, he discovered a body, unrecognizable except for the dog tag still hanging around its neck. He whispered the name, closed the man's eyes, and walked on. People stopped fearing death. They feared being forgotten. That's why they carved names into tree trunks and rocks. That's why they wrote poems in secret notebooks, buried under bamboo roots. Memory became a form of resistance. Despite everything, no one quit. If someone collapsed, another would carry their load. If a bridge was blown, they rebuilt it before sunrise. If one route burned, they cut a new one beside it. They didn't walk through hell. They built a road through it and kept marching. In 1968, a new kind of lifeline was born. One not carried on shoulders or bicycles, but flowing beneath the soil. The Zhangdao pipeline. Fuel was everything. Without it, trucks stalled, artillery froze, and the southern front faltered. But transporting fuel by barrel across mountains was slow and deadly. The answer came in the form of metal pipes, bamboo joints, and courage. The soldiers dug by hand. Shovels were scarce, so they used cans, helmets, even sharpened sticks. Each meter of pipeline ran beneath enemy eyes, under forest floor, rivers, even cliffs. To avoid detection, they buried pipes by moonlight, their hands blistered and blackened with oil. Sometimes the pipes burst. Sometimes American aircraft spotted the leaks and bombed the entire section. When that happened, they started over.
No plans.
Just deeper ditches. They used salvaged Soviet and Chinese pipe parts, sometimes even welding with car batteries. Entire squads of engineers slept beside their lines, listening for leaks in the dark. One soldier said, "I dream in the sound of oil flowing." By 1975, over 5,000 kilometers of fuel lines had been laid, most by hand. The pipeline crossed rivers, scaled cliffs, and wound around mountains, invisible yet vital. The Americans never believed it was possible. They didn't imagine that a nation could build a fuel artery through one of the harshest jungles on Earth. But Vietnam did, and the fuel flowed not just through pipe, but through veins, through spirit, through will. Under the trees, an invisible river carried fire toward victory. By 1975, the Truong Sun Trail had become a colossal network. Over 17,000 kilometers of paths, bridges, tunnels, rivers crossed and mountains conquered. But no official map could capture it. Not fully, because it wasn't a single road. It was a living organism, branching, shifting, adapting to the war itself. It ran under trees, along rivers, through mountains. Sometimes it vanished completely beneath the ground, only to emerge in places no one expected. The Americans tried to trace it. Satellites searched, planes dropped sensors, spies sent reports. Still, it moved faster than their maps. For the soldiers, there was no compass, only memory. They remembered which tree marked a turn, which rock looked like a bird, which stretch smelled of night rain or clay. They didn't need signs. The trail was etched into their bodies. A boy named Han, just 17, was said to know 300 kilometers of jungle paths by heart. When asked how, he said, "I walk with my eyes closed. My feet remember." His voice broke when he told them he could only sleep while walking, because stopping made the ghosts visit. There were places on the trail where no one spoke. Not from fear but respect. The trees remembered who had fallen. The soil was still stained in places, and the wind carried names instead of leaves. The trail was built with tools, but it survived through memory. It was not marked by signs or borders, but by sacrifice. Even today, some veterans return to find it, but they no longer trust maps. They look for trees they planted, stones they sat on, turns they bled beside. That's how you find a road that history tried to forget. Today, much of the Truong Sun Trail lies hidden beneath roots, moss, and silence. The jungle has reclaimed it. The bombs are gone. The fires have cooled. But if you walk long enough and quiet enough, you can still feel it breathing beneath your feet. Veterans return. Old men now, stooped and silver-haired. They do not carry rifles anymore, only memories. They stop beside trees they once carved their names into. They kneel where a friend once fell. They speak to the earth in whispers. We are here. We remember. Some spots have markers. Most don't. But every hill has a name in someone's heart. Every stretch of red soil once held the weight of footsteps that would not yield. Younger generations come too. Sons and daughters, students, filmmakers. They follow faded maps, listen to old stories, touch the tools once used to dig trenches and build fuel lines. Many can't believe such things were done by hand. But they see the truth in the calluses of those who lived it. One veteran, when asked what Truong's son meant to him, answered simply, everything, because it was more than a road. It was a vow, a pulse, a collective breath that said, we will not stop, not for bombs, not for death, not even for time. And that vow endures, not on the pages of textbooks, not in museum glass, but in every step taken where no road should exist. Truong Sun was never just a trail. It was, and still is, the living spine of a people who refused to be broken. That's it for today. Everyone can like and subscribe to the channel so I can follow stories about the Vietnam and American wars in the next video. Thank you.